The silence was the worst part, out here, in the graveyard of empires. Silence was a predator. It ate at the sanity, chewed on the memories, and spat out the hollowed-out husk of a man, Commander Jace Theron, formerly of the Terran Coalition fleet, now a glorified junk collector. Let the silence gnaw. It was a familiar pain. His ship, the Stray Dog, was a scarred beast of patched armor and repurposed military hardware. It drifted through the debris field orbiting Xylos, a star that had choked on its own fire a century ago. The dead sun was a bruised plum in a black velvet sky, casting no light, only a profound and infinite shadow. Around it tumbled the frozen corpses of warships, a mausoleum of ambition, human dreadnoughts. Their steel spines snapped, floated beside the skeletal remains of Virilan cruisers, their organic hulls now gray and petrified. It was a boneyard born from the last great war, and Jace was its lone groundskeeper. His console pinged, a soft, apologetic chime that cut through the low thrum of the life support, a proximity alert. Jace swiveled in his command chair, the worn synth leather groaning under his weight. On the main view screen, a new contact resolved from the glittering junk. It was Virelin, no doubt about it. A scout-class vessel, a thorn ship by its silhouette, shaped like a vicious seed pod. Most of the wrecks out here were cold. Their energy cores bled dry decades ago. This one, however, was leaking something. Not energy, not radiation. The scanner flashed a symbol Jace had not seen in a long time, a biological signature. It was faint, a mere whisper on the edge of detection, but it was there, and it was strange. He ran a diagnostic, his fingers flying across the console with muscle memory forged in the fires of battle. Virilan biosignals were usually harmonious, a clean, resonant frequency like a choir. This was different. This was a single, discordant note. It felt broken, feverish. It was a signal that should not exist, a ghost in a machine that was itself a ghost. Curiosity was a luxury scavengers could not afford. It was a quick way to find a forgotten mine, a booby-trapped cargo hold, or the waiting arms of a pirate crew. Jace's protocol was simple: identify, tag, and strip anything of value from a safe distance. But the signal pulsed again, a little stronger this time, and it felt less like a beacon and more like a heartbeat. A dying one. "All right, you beautiful wreck," Jace muttered to the ship on his screen. "What secrets are you keeping?" He nudged the Stray Dog forward, its thrusters firing in gentle bursts, navigating the metallic icebergs with practiced ease. The Virilan ship grew larger, its bio-woven hull pockmarked by ancient weapons fire. It looked dead. No lights, no movement, just a derelict drifting toward the dead star's embrace. Yet that signal persisted, a siren song in the silent abyss, against every instinct that had kept him alive for 10 years since the war. Jace docked. The magnetic clamps of the Stray Dog locked onto the thorn ship with a heavy, metallic thud that echoed through his hull. He suited up, the hiss of pressurization a familiar comfort. He slung a plasma cutter over one shoulder and holstered his pulse pistol, its grip worn smooth from his hand. On his belt, secured in a magnetic sheath, was the one thing he never parted with: a combat knife with a blade forged from the shattered cockpit glass of his last command. A reminder. The airlock cycled open, and Jace stepped into the alien vessel. The difference was immediate and visceral. Human ships smelled of ozone, oil, and recycled air. This Virelin ship smelled alive, even in its apparent death. It was the scent of damp earth after a rainstorm, mixed with the sharp, metallic tang of blood. The walls were not plated steel, but a lattice of hardened, bone-like cartilage, interwoven with what looked like massive, dormant veins. Dim, Phosphorescent moss grew in the crevices, casting the corridor in an eerie green-blue twilight. He moved cautiously, his rifle's tack light cutting a sharp white beam through the gloom. The ship was a tomb. He passed chambers filled with desiccated flora that had once served as nutrient synthesizers. He saw the empty husks of Virellan flight suits, discarded like shed insect skins. The silence in here was different from the silence of space. It was heavy, expectant. It felt like holding your breath. The biosignal grew stronger, pulling him toward the heart of the ship, the command core, or as the Virellans called it, the synaptic throne. The entrance to the bridge was sealed by an iris of sinewy fibers. It should have been impenetrable without a Virellan genetic key. But it was partially open, its edges curled back and blackened as if from an internal energy surge. Jace squeezed through the gap. The bridge was a cathedral of dying light. A domed ceiling of crystalline material showed the starfield outside. The dead sun a void at its center. Consoles, grown from the floor like luminous mushrooms, flickered with failing power. And in the center of it all, fused to the synaptic throne, was the source of the signal. It was a woman. She was naked, her form slender and athletic, built with the predatory grace of her species. Her skin, the color of pale moonlight, was a canvas of wounds. Deep lacerations wept a fluid that glowed with a soft, golden luminescence. But that was not the most shocking part. From her back, her arms and her legs, thick root-like cables of biotech snaked out, burrowing into her flesh before connecting directly to the throne. She was not sitting in the command chair. She was an integral part of it, a living component plugged into a dying machine. Her long silver hair floated in the low gravity, a halo around a face contorted in pain. Jace froze, his blood turning to ice. A high blood. Her pointed ears and the faint, intricate patterns that glowed beneath her skin marked her as Virellan royalty. He had not seen one this close since the Battle of Cygnus X1. Since the day his world ended. The smell in the room hit him then. Burned circuits, blood, and something else. Something forbidden. Her blood was not just blood. It was a conduit. He could see nanites pulsing within her veins, glowing with a sickly, unstable light, forbidden tech. The kind of biological warfare both sides had agreed to abandon, the kind that rewrote life itself. His vision swam. For a second, the bridge dissolved, replaced by the fire and smoke of a burning battlefield. The scream of twisting metal, the acrid smell of plasma-scorched flesh. His men, his unit, ripped apart by Virellan shock troops, their eyes glowing with the same cold fire he saw in the patterns on this woman's skin. He remembered Sergeant Eva Rostova, her face a mask of terror as a Virellan warrior impaled her on a living blade that grew from its own arm. He remembered the torture, the long weeks in a Virellan prison cell where they used biological agents to peel back his mind layer by layer, searching for intelligence, reveling in his agony. Jace's hand flew to his pulse pistol, the safety clicking off with an audible snap. His breath came in ragged gasps. Every nerve screamed at him to pull the trigger, to end it, to put a hole through the heart of the monster that represented everything he had lost. She was one of them, the architects of his pain, the butchers of his friends. His knuckles were white on the grip of his pistol. His finger tightened on the trigger. Then, her eyes opened. They were the color of liquid chrome, swirling with pain and exhaustion. They focused on him, not with the arrogance he expected, not with hatred, but with a desperate animal terror. Her lips, pale and cracked, parted. A voice, hoarse and weak, rasped through the silent bridge. "Please." The word was a crack in the dam of his rage, and it was so small, so human. "Help me," she whispered, her head slumping forward. Jace's mind was a maelstrom. This was a trick. It had to be. Virulons were masters of psychological warfare. They didn't plead. They conquered. They dominated. They did not show weakness. He took a step forward, the pistol still leveled at her heart. "Who are you?" he snarled, his voice a low growl. Her head lolled to the side. She seemed to struggle to form words, her consciousness flickering like the dying consoles around them. "Kalira," she breathed. "Princess." Kalira. The name hit Jace like a physical blow. Princess Kalira, the celestial bloom, the last surviving heir of the Virulon Empire. The official report said she was executed by her own people during the internal purges that followed the armistice. A political casualty to appease a rising faction. The news had been a footnote in the grand scheme of post-war reconstruction. But Jace remembered it. If she was alive, she was the most wanted fugitive in the galaxy. Hunted by the new Virulon regime that saw her as a symbol of the old ways, and by the human coalition that wanted her head for war crimes committed under her father's rule. "They mixed my blood," she stammered, her eyes glazing over. "The forbidden tech, a key, to stop them, to stop the next war." Jace laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that held no humor. "A key? You are not a key. You are a weapon, or a target. Either way, you are not my problem." But he did not shoot. The soldier in him screamed for vengeance. The scavenger, however, whispered of opportunity. A living Virulon princess? The bounty on her head, from either side, would be enough to buy him a small moon. Or he could turn her over to coalition intelligence. They would spend years dissecting her, pulling every secret from her mind. It would be a fate worse than death. A fitting end for one of her kind. He lowered his pistol, but the conflict still raged within him. His gaze fell on the combat knife at his belt. It would be so easy. A quick, silent end. Justice for his fallen comrades. An end to the ghost that stood before him. But her words echoed in his mind. A key to stop the next war. It was likely a lie, a desperate gambit to survive. But what if it was not? The whispers on the trade lanes spoke of a new Virulon faction, more aggressive and expansionist than the last, rearming in the shadows. Another war was not a possibility, it was an inevitability. He made a decision, not out of mercy, but out of cold, hard pragmatism. She was worth more alive than dead. For now, Jace holstered his pistol and moved forward. He unspooled a set of magnetic binders from his belt. Kalira watched him approach, her silver eyes wide with fear. She flinched as he got close, a tremor running through her body that caused the ship around them to groan in sympathy. "Do not touch me," she hissed, a spark of the royal authority he expected finally showing itself. "You do not have a choice in the matter, princess," Jace said flatly. He worked quickly, his movements efficient. The cables fused to her body were too thick to cut easily, but her hands were free. He clamped the magnetic binders around her wrists, the metal humming as it activated, locking her arms to the throne's structure. She was too weak to resist, her brief flash of defiance fading as another wave of pain washed over her. He stood back, assessing his captive, wounded, drained, and plugged into a derelict ship. She was no immediate threat, but the question remained, what to do with her? Kill her? Ransom her? Or listen to her insane story about stopping a war? Before he could process the options, the ship answered for him. A deep, resonant hum started to build, vibrating up from the floor into the soles of his boots. The dormant veins in the walls began to pulse with a faint golden light, the same color as the fluid leaking from Kalira's wounds. The consoles on the bridge flared to life, Virulon script scrolling rapidly across their surfaces. Kalira's eyes shot open, wide with alarm. "No," Not now, she whispered. What is happening? Jace demanded, grabbing his pistol again. The ship, she gasped, her body arching in pain as the energy surged. It is responding to me, to the tech in my blood. It is waking up. A sickening, wet, tearing sound echoed through the vessel. Jace spun around to look at the entrance to the bridge. The sinewy iris was contracting, sealing itself shut with a final, fleshy squelch. Red alert icons flashed across the consoles. The biohull was hardening. Every exit was being sealed. He ran to the iris, slamming his fist against the tough, membrane-like surface. It was like hitting solid rock. He was trapped. He turned back to Kalira, his face a mask of fury. What did you do? Nothing, she cried out, her voice straining. It is a defensive protocol. It thinks we are under attack. As if on cue, a new sound cut through the rising thrum of the ship's engines. It was not an internal sound. It was a transmission, a tight beam signal from outside. Jace's wrist comp, linked to the stray dog's sensors, chirped an alert. A ship had just dropped out of warp space at the edge of the debris field. It was not broadcasting any identification codes, but the energy signature of its weapon systems was unmistakable. It was a hunter, on one of the newly activated Virelin consoles. A schematic appeared, their ship, the Thorn, highlighted in the center, and a few thousand kilometers away, a predator icon, sharp and menacing, was closing in fast. A targeting lock indicator began to blink, cold and red. Someone had been hunting Kalira, and now they had found them both. The ship beneath Jace's feet lurched as its ancient bioorganic engines ignited with a guttural roar, a scream of a creature being violently roused from a long slumber. He was trapped in a living prison with a dying princess, and death was coming for them both. The universe tore itself apart. There was no other way to describe the jump. It was not the clean, sterile transition of a human-made warp drive, which folded space with mathematical precision. This was a biological act, a violent, visceral plunge into nothingness. Jace felt his bones vibrate, his teeth ache, as if the very atoms of his body were being unstrung and rethreaded. The view screen became a smear of bleeding starlight, a painter's canvas caught in a hurricane. He was a stone being swallowed by a leviathan, and all he could do was brace against the bulkhead and ride the convulsion. Through the chaos, he saw her, Kalira. Her body, still fused to the throne, was rigid. Her silver hair whipped around her head, and a soft, guttural cry escaped her lips, a sound that was equal parts agony and ecstasy. The ship and the princess were one entity, and they were feeling this violation of physics together. The light from her skin intensified, pulsing in time with the ship's shuddering engines, turning the bridge into a strobe-lit nightmare. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. The violent tearing sensation smoothed into a strange, frictionless glide. Outside, the starfield was gone, replaced by a swirling tunnel of incandescent liquid color, warp space. It was a sight Jace had seen 1,000 times, but never like this. It felt organic, as if they were traveling through the neural pathways of a god. The ship's internal gravity stabilized, and Jace found his footing. He was breathing heavily, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked at Kalira. The raw energy of the jump seemed to have acted like a defibrillator. The vacant, pained look in her eyes was gone, replaced by a sharp, unnerving clarity. The golden glow from her wounds had subsided, and he could see the flesh slowly, unnaturally, knitting itself back together. The nanobiotics in her blood were working overtime. She turned her head, her liquid chrome eyes locking onto his. A slow, deliberate smile touched her lips. It was a predator's smile. That, she said, her voice no longer a weak rasp but a melodic, confident alto. Was invigorating. I apologize if it was too much for your fragile human physiology. Jay stalked toward her, his face grim. Where are you taking us? We are not going anywhere, Commander, she corrected, testing the magnetic binders on her wrists with a casual flex of her fingers. The ship is following a dormant emergency protocol, taking me to the nearest safe harbor. You are merely baggage. Her gaze drifted down his body, lingering for a moment. Tell me, is all human military hardware as rigid and unresponsive as its personnel? Jace's jaw tightened. He ignored the bait. Override it. Kalira laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. Override my own genetics? A charmingly primitive notion. This ship is an extension of my bloodline. It answers to my subconscious needs, not my verbal commands. And right now, it needs to repair itself, as do I. He watched as the last of the deep lacerations on her torso sealed over, leaving behind only faint shimmering lines on her skin, like scars made of mother-of-pearl. The nanobiotics were more advanced than anything he had ever seen. They were not just healing her, they were remaking her. Her veins pulsed with a soft internal light, a network of living circuitry. You are a monster, Jace said, the words coming out as a low growl. I am a survivor, she countered, her eyes flashing. Something your species struggles with. You do not survive. You merely endure, polluting the galaxy with your noise and your rust until you break. We Virelans adapt. We become stronger. It is a concept I would not expect you to grasp. The rage that had been simmering in him since he first saw her boiled over. He drew the knife from his belt, its crystalline edge catching the ethereal light of warp space. In 2 strides, he was standing over her, the point of the blade resting just below her chin, dimpling the pale skin of her throat. I have endured things you cannot even imagine, princess, he hissed, his face inches from hers. I have seen your people turn men inside out for sport. I have watched your living ships feast on the wreckage of ours. Do not lecture me on strength. Her gaze did not waver. She did not flinch from the blade. Instead, she leaned into it slightly, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. It might have been fear, or it might have been curiosity. And yet, here you are, she whispered, her voice a seductive challenge, holding a shard of glass against the throat of your only hope for survival. How very human of you. She tilted her head. Are you going to do it? Will you kill me and doom yourself to drift through space in a ship you cannot control? Or will you put your toy away and listen? His hand trembled, the desire for vengeance warring with the cold logic of his situation. She was right. He was trapped. Killing her would be suicide. With a curse, he pulled the knife back and sheathed it, the magnetic lock clicking into place with a sound of finality. Talk, he bit out. Kalira's smile returned, triumphant. As I said before, I am a key, or rather, I was meant to be a lock, a final ceremonial one. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. There was to be a peace treaty, a binding ritual to solidify the new truce between the rising Virellan houses and your coalition dignitaries, an exchange of cultural significance. What kind of ritual? Jace asked, his suspicion growing. A sacrifice, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. My life, publicly and ceremoniously ended, to appease the factions in my empire who still thirsted for war, and to prove to your leaders that the old dynasty was truly over. I was to be the price of peace. Jay stared at her, stunned into silence. He had assumed she was a war criminal fleeing justice, not a lamb fleeing the altar. But you ran, he finally managed to say. My life has a purpose beyond being a political statement, she replied sharply. My father, before he was deposed, foresaw the treachery of the new houses. He knew they did not want peace, they wanted dominance. He embedded this technology into my blood, a fail-safe. The nanobiotics are not just for healing. They carry a cipher, a code that can influence the old imperial network. But the process was incomplete when I was forced to flee. I am unstable. The ship is trying to find a place where I can find the components to stabilize myself before this technology either consumes me or burns out entirely. So you are a ticking bomb, Jace concluded. A poetic, if crude, assessment. Yes. She gave him a wry look. It is a common human expression, is it not? To bite the bullet? That is not what it means, Jace said, rubbing his temples. The sheer absurdity of the situation was giving him a headache. Why would it not? It seems a terribly inefficient way to die, she mused. Surely there are better things to bite. Before Jace could formulate a sarcastic reply, the ship shuddered again. The swirling colors of warp space outside the viewport resolved back into the familiar stark blackness of real space, dotted with distant stars. A dead moon, a pitted gray sphere of rock, filled the screen. It seems we have arrived, Kaelira announced. The ship maneuvered itself into a docking cradle carved into a vast canyon on the moon's dark side. Jace saw the lights of a settlement glittering in the chasm. A chaotic, sprawling outpost, Port Noctis, a black market hub, a haven for pirates, smugglers, and every other form of galactic refuse. It was the last place he would have chosen to go. A safe harbor? Jace scoffed. This is a cesspool. It is the only place within range that deals in unregulated biotech. The ship needs a crystalline energy regulator to safely interface with the nanobiotics in my system. Without it, the next jump could overload my cellular structure. Kaelira looked down at her bound hands. I assume you will release me now. I am not an idiot. Then you will have to acquire the component for me. It is a K7 matrix regulator, Virellan origin. You will find it in the tech stalls. She paused. And Commander? Try not to be cheated. Your kind is notoriously easy to swindle. Releasing her was not an option. Leaving her alone was not an option. That left only one terrible choice. Jace found a spare power conduit and, after disabling the throne's connection to her, managed to disconnect the primary bio cables from her body. She let out a sharp gasp of pain, her skin paling, but she was free of the throne. He kept her wrists bound, connecting the binders with a short, high-energy filament. She was his prisoner, and she would be coming with him. He found a heavy hooded scavenger's cloak in his gear and threw it at her. Cover yourself. She pulled the rough fabric around her naked form, the hood casting her face in deep shadow. For the first time, she looked small, almost fragile. It was a fleeting illusion. Port Noctis was a sensory assault. The air tasted of spice, hot metal, and unwashed bodies. The canyon city was a maze of narrow alleyways and multi-level platforms, lit by the flickering holographic signs of weapon shops, gambling dens, and gene-splicing clinics. Beings of a dozen species shoved past them, a river of smugglers, mercenaries, and thieves. Jace kept one hand on his pistol, the other gripping the energy filament that connected him to Kaelira, pulling her along behind him. "Oh, charming place," she commented from beneath her hood, her voice laced with aristocratic disgust. "It smells like my cousin's reptile pits. Just keep your head down and let me handle this." Jace growled. He located a stall run by a four-armed Grolian, its shelves overflowing with stolen and scavenged tech. while Jace haggled, trying to trade a memory core from his last salvage run for the regulator. Kaelira stood silently behind him. He was so focused on the Grolian's attempts to price gouge him that he did not notice she had drifted closer to a display of unsecured components. Suddenly, a commotion erupted behind him. Two hulking figures, reptilian thugs with syndicate tattoos on their scaled necks, had cornered a merchant in the alley. It was a classic shakedown. Jace's instinct was to ignore it, to finish his business and leave. But then one of them shoved the old merchant to the ground, and something inside Jace snapped. With a sigh, he turned. "Gentlemen, I think the old man has paid his dues." The lead thug grinned, showing a row of needle-sharp teeth. "Mind your own business, human, before we decide to take a toll from you, too." Jace did not waste any more words. He moved. His first punch was a precise, brutal blow to the thug's throat. As the creature gagged, Jace spun, kicking the second thug's legs out from under him. He drew his pistol in a fluid motion, pressing the barrel against the first thug's head. "Leave," he said, his voice deadly calm. The two scrambled away, vanishing into the crowd. Jace holstered his weapon and turned back to the stall, only to see Kaelira holding the small, crystalline regulator in her bound hands. The Grolian merchant was staring at the empty space on his shelf, then at Kaelira, his multiple mouths opening to shout. "I believe our transaction is complete," Kaelira said smoothly, tucking the component into a fold of her cloak. She had stolen it while he was distracted. "Run!" Jace said, grabbing her arm and pulling her into the throng. They plunged deeper into the labyrinthine alleys, the Grolian's enraged shouts echoing behind them. They were almost to the docking bay when a new voice, amplified and chillingly familiar, cut through the din. "The bounty is mine. 5 million credits for the runaway princess." Jace looked up. Standing on a sky bridge above them was a massive figure in obsidian armor, a Xylot, a species renowned for their relentless tracking abilities. It was the bounty hunter from the debris field. The hunter raised a heavy plasma rifle and fired a warning shot into the ground near their feet, sending sparks flying. Panic erupted in the market. 5 million credits. It was a king's ransom. Suddenly, every smuggler and mercenary in the alley was looking at them, their eyes filled with greed. Blaster bolts started to fly from all directions. "This way," Jace yelled, shoving Kaelira down a narrow side passage. It was a chaotic, desperate flight. They dodged blaster fire, overturned market stalls, and the grasping hands of those trying to claim the bounty. Jace fired his own pistol, providing cover fire as they sprinted for the ship. They were 100 meters from the docking bay when a stray shot ricocheted off a bulkhead and struck Kaelira in the shoulder. She cried out, stumbling. The impact tore the cloak from her, sending it fluttering to the grimy floor. In the dim light of the canyon, her skin, now exposed, began to glow with a soft, ethereal luminescence. The faint patterns beneath its surface pulsed brightly, a beacon in the darkness. Her blood, glowing gold, seeped from the wound. There was no longer any doubt. A collective gasp went through the crowd. It was her, the celestial bloom of the Virilan Empire, alive and bleeding in their midst. The bounty hunter landed on the ground in front of them, blocking their path. "Nowhere left to run, Your Highness." But Kaelira was already moving. With a surge of adrenaline, she spun, using the energy filament connecting their binders as a whip, catching the hunter's rifle and tearing it from his grasp. It was the opening Jace needed. He lunged forward, slamming his shoulder into the hunter's chest, sending the larger being staggering backward. He dragged Kaelira the last few feet onto the Thorn ship's boarding ramp just as it began to retract. The ship's engines roared to life, unleashing a wave of energy that sent the crowd scattering. Jace sealed the outer door as the ship lifted off, blaster fire pinging harmlessly against its bio-woven hull. A moment later, they were clear, accelerating into the blackness of space. The adrenaline faded, replaced by the thrum of the engines and Kaylira's pained breathing. She had collapsed against the wall of the airlock, clutching her shoulder. The wound was deep, bleeding freely. Jace looked down at her, at the blood, the glowing skin, the fragile tremble in her limbs. The arrogant princess was gone again, replaced by a wounded, cornered girl. His hatred for her people, was a fire in his gut. But layered over it now was a confusing, unwelcome sense of responsibility. She was his prisoner, his asset, his problem. With a heavy sigh, he knelt down. He opened a medical kit from his scavenger pack, his movements brisk and impersonal. "Hold still," he ordered, his voice rougher than he intended. He cut away the torn fabric of the cloak around the wound. He had to be gentle, his fingers brushing against her strangely warm, faintly glowing skin. She hissed in pain as he applied the antiseptic, but she did not pull away. As he worked, dressing the wound with a regeneration patch, he saw the intricate, shimmering patterns on her skin up close. They were beautiful, like a star chart written on flesh. He finished his work and stood up, avoiding her gaze. He felt her eyes on him, but he did not acknowledge it. He had fought for her. He had saved her. He did not understand why. He turned to leave the airlock and head for the bridge, needing the cold logic of a ship's console to clear his head. He had to figure out where the ship was going next, how to stay ahead of the hunters who would now be swarming the space lanes. As he reached the doorway, her voice, soft and tired, stopped him. "Thank you, Jace." It was the first time she had used his name. He did not turn around. He did not reply. He simply stood there for a long moment in the silent corridor of the alien ship, more conflicted and uncertain than he had been in years. The ship tore through the Veil Nebula, a vast swirling shroud of crimson and violet gas where the ghosts of old war arcs slept. These were the Leviathans of the last war, colossal Virellan world killers, now adrift and silent. Their dead biohulls, some hundreds of kilometers long, floated like mountain ranges in the cosmic dust, their interiors scoured by decades of radiation. It was the perfect place to hide. No sane pilot, hunter or otherwise, would risk navigating the nebula's treacherous gravitational tides and phantom energy signatures. But Kaylira's ship, guided by its instinctual programming, moved through the wreckage with an eerie, predatory grace. Jace stood on the bridge, watching the titanic silhouettes drift by. The silence between him and Kaylira had stretched for hours, a taut wire of unspoken hostility and reluctant alliance. She sat on the deck, her back against the base of the synaptic throne, working the stolen regulator into a port on her forearm. There was a soft click, and the faint, erratic pulsing of the nanobiotics in her veins smoothed into a steady, rhythmic glow. She let out a long, shuddering breath of relief. "The instability is contained," she announced to the quiet bridge. "For now. But the core charge is still depleting." "Glad to hear it," Jace said without turning around. "I was getting tired of being your personal medic and getaway driver. You do both so poorly. I am surprised you have not been replaced," she retorted, though her voice lacked its usual sharp edge. She sounded weary. "This ship, this body, they are both running on borrowed time. We need to reach the core synapse." Jace finally turned to face her. "You have mentioned that before. The Great Virellan Control Center. What is it exactly?" Kaylira hesitated, her chrome eyes studying his face, weighing him. "It is not a place," she said slowly. "It is a nexus. The central hub from which the old empire controlled its fleets, its armies, its entire biotechnical infrastructure. It is the mind of the Virilan war machine. She rose to her feet, moving with a newfound steadiness. She walked toward the crystalline viewport, her bare feet making no sound on the deck. The nanobiotics my father embedded in me are more than a failsafe. Jace, they are a map, a living key, encrypted directly into my nervous system. She gestured to the faint, shimmering patterns beneath her skin. This is not decoration. It is a star chart, a set of coordinates, a genetic password. It leads to the synapse. Jace felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The implications were staggering. So whoever controls you, controls the map. Whoever controls the map, she corrected, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, can access the synapse, and whoever accesses the synapse can rewrite the very code of war in this galaxy. They could reactivate the entire dormant Virilan fleet, turn our living ships against their new masters. Or they could issue a single command to deactivate every piece of Virilan technology, from a soldier's rifle to the mightiest war arc. They could end any future war before it even begins. He stared at her, the scale of her secret finally crashing down on him. She was not just a fugitive princess. She was the most powerful weapon in the known universe, and she did not even know how to use herself. The new houses, my sister, they do not want to destroy the key. Kalira continued, her gaze lost in the swirling nebula outside. They want to dissect it. They want to tear this map from my body and use it to build an empire that will make my father's look like a peaceful garden. Before Jace could respond, a jarring alarm blared through the ship. Red lights flashed, bathing the bridge in a bloody glow. An energy reading spiked on the main console. It was not a ship. It was a planet. One they were approaching far too quickly. "In what now?" Jace demanded. Kalira rushed to a console, her fingers flying across the luminous surface. It is a planetary defense system, old, imperial. It is supposed to recognize my genetic signature, but something is corrupting the signal. She grimaced as another jolt shook the vessel. The planet's atmosphere. It is saturated with wild biotech, remnants of a failed terraforming project from the war. It is reacting with the nanobiotics in my blood, confusing the ship's systems. Their descent was no longer controlled. They were being pulled in, caught in a gravitational net woven from rogue technology. The ship screamed as it hit the upper atmosphere, its hull glowing white-hot. Jace strapped himself into the pilot's auxiliary chair as the vessel bucked and shuddered, a wild beast fighting its leash. He watched on the view screen as a jungle of impossible colors rushed up to meet them. The crash was a symphony of destruction. The ship tore a scar through the alien forest, shearing trees of pulsating fungus and crystalline flora before finally plowing into the soft, swampy earth of a ravine and coming to a violent halt. The lights died. The engines fell silent. The only sound was the hiss of ruptured conduits and the steady drip of some viscous fluid from the ceiling. Jace unstrapped himself, his body bruised and aching. Kalira was slumped over the console, unconscious. He checked her pulse. It was rapid but steady. He threw her over his shoulder in a fireman's carry and grabbed a survival pack and his rifle. The ship was dead, its biohull breached. They were exposed. He kicked open the main hatch and stepped out into a world of vibrant, menacing life. The air was thick, humid, and smelled of ozone and decay. The jungle was a riot of bioluminescent plants, casting the ravine in a shifting, multicolored twilight. Strange, chittering sounds echoed from the dense undergrowth. It was a planet that was aggressively, terrifyingly alive. He found a shallow cave carved into the side of the ravine, its entrance masked by a curtain of hanging phosphorescent vines. He laid Kalira down gently on the dry floor. Her skin was hot to the touch, and the patterns on her body were glowing erratically, shifting and changing shape like oil on water. The planet's atmosphere was having a more profound effect on her than he had realized. As dusk fell, the sky turned a sickly shade of green, and a strange, shimmering rain began to fall. It was not water. It was a fine, glittering mist that seemed to hum with a low energy. Jace watched as the mist seeped into the cave, and a feeling of profound disorientation began to wash over him. The edges of his vision softened. The chittering sounds of the jungle deepened into what sounded like whispers. He looked at Kalira. Her eyes were open, but they were unfocused, staring at something he could not see. She was muttering to herself in the flowing, sibilant Virellan tongue. "The sky is weeping light," she whispered in accented standard, a strange, dreamy smile on her face. "They are memories. Can you see them, Commander? The memories of the dead." "It is a hallucinogen," Jace said, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. "Some kind of airborne spore or pollen. We are breathing it in." He tried to stand, to cover the entrance of the cave, but his limbs felt heavy, disconnected. The cave walls seemed to breathe in and out. The shadows danced, taking on familiar shapes. He saw the faces of his fallen unit, their eyes accusing him. "You left us, Commander. You survived." "You." He stumbled back, shaking his head to clear it. He looked at Kalira, and for a terrifying second, he did not see her. He saw the Virellan warrior who had killed Sergeant Rostova, its living blade dripping with his friend's blood. His hand went for his knife. "You," he snarled, his mind twisting reality into a nightmare. "You killed them all." Kalira scrambled backward, her own perception warped by the storm. In her eyes, Jace was not a human scavenger. He was one of her sister's elite guards, his face a mask of cold duty, his knife a surgical tool meant to carve the map from her flesh. "You will not take it from me," she shrieked, her hand darting out to grab a sharp, heavy rock from the cave floor. They circled each other in the confined space, two prisoners of their own trauma, their minds poisoned by the alien air. He was the ghost of her past. She was the ghost of his. He lunged, knife first. She swung the rock, aiming for his head. Their movements were clumsy, dreamlike. The blade of his knife sliced her arm. The edge of the rock glanced off his temple, sending a shower of sparks across his vision. He tackled her, and they fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs, wrestling for control. His hand was on her throat. Hers was clawing at his face. They were a breath away from mutual destruction, two feral animals fighting in a cage. And then, something broke. Perhaps it was the raw, desperate contact, the feel of a living, breathing body beneath his hands. Perhaps it was the shared insanity of the moment. But Jace looked down into her terrified, chrome eyes, and he saw not a monster, but a reflection of his own desperation, a survivor. A choked, hysterical sound escaped his lips. It might have been a sob. It turned into a laugh, a raw, ragged, utterly unhinged laugh. Kalira, seeing the sudden shift in his eyes, stopped struggling. Confusion warred with fear on her face. Then she, too, began to laugh. It started as a weak chuckle and grew into a full-throated peal of laughter that echoed through the cave, a duet of madness against the backdrop of the whispering storm. They collapsed against each other, the fight completely drained from them, their laughter slowly subsiding into breathless pants. The hallucinogenic fog in their minds seemed to recede, leaving behind a raw, painful clarity. Jace rolled off her, slumping against the cave wall, his head throbbing. "I almost killed you," he said, his voice hollow. "I almost caved in your skull," she replied, her own voice trembling slightly. She touched the shallow cut on her arm, watching a bead of golden blood well up. We are a terrible pair, you and I. They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the shimmering rain. The shared brush with death had shattered the wall of hostility between them, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. They used a bioagent on me, Jace said quietly, staring into the darkness. In the prison camp, it gets inside your head, makes you relive your worst moments over and over again until you cannot tell what is real. He looked at her. This storm, it felt like that. Kalira pulled her knees to her chest. My sister. She was always jealous. I was the heir. She was the spare. When she joined the coup, she designed the torture protocols for enemies of the new state herself. She did not look at him. She enjoyed finding new ways to break people. I imagined she would find this planet inspiring. In that moment, they were not a human and a Virelin. They were not a commander and a princess. They were just two soldiers, scarred by the same war, confessing their wounds by a dying campfire. Kalira slowly reached up and unclasped the scavenger cloak he had given her. She let it fall from her shoulders. The regeneration patch he had applied on the ship had already fallen off, leaving behind another faint pearlescent scar. But it was not her shoulder she wanted to show him. She turned slightly, showing him her side, just below her ribs. A long, jagged scar, thicker and uglier than the others, ran from her back to her navel. The skin was puckered and discolored. It was not a battle wound. It was surgical. This is where they put it in, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They cut me open. They wove the primary conduits of the map directly into my neural pathways. When they were done, they reknitted the flesh to hide the seams. He reached out, his fingers tracing the edge of the scar, his touch surprisingly gentle. Her skin was warm, electric. A current passed between them, a spark of something that had been simmering beneath the surface since they first met. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was something far more dangerous. He looked up from the scar to her face. Her chrome eyes were dark, her lips slightly parted. The space between them became charged, heavy with unspoken questions. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. Their faces were inches apart. He could feel her breath on his skin. He could see the universe reflected in her eyes. He was going to kiss her. He was going to close that final infinitesimal gap and press his lips against hers. But she pulled back at the last second, shaking her head. A look of profound sadness crossed her features. You would not survive me, Jace, she whispered. The nanobiotics, they are a part of me now. My kiss, it could be a poison to your kind. Before the charged silence could stretch any further, a new sound cut through the jungle. The sharp crack of a pulse rifle. It was close. Shouts in a guttural, corrupted dialect followed. Jace was on his feet in an instant, grabbing his own rifle. Raiders! He peered through the vine-covered entrance. In the eerie glow of the jungle, he saw them. A small band of scavengers, their bodies grotesquely modified with scavenged, corrupted Virelin biotech. One had a living blade, a crude imitation of a warrior's weapon grafted to his arm. They were moving toward the wreckage of the ship. They are after the tech, Kalira said, standing behind him. If they find us, they will tear us apart for the components in our bodies. Then we do not let them find us, Jace said. He checked the charge on his rifle, and it was half full. There are too many for a direct assault, Kalira observed, her tactical mind clicking back into place. She pointed toward a ridge overlooking the ravine. If we can get up there, we will have the high ground. We can pick them off as they search the wreck. The fight was brutal and efficient. They moved through the jungle like shadows, a silent, deadly team. Jace, with his military training, provided covering fire, his shots precise and lethal. Kaelira, with her innate Virellan agility, was a phantom, creating diversions, striking from unexpected angles, using the terrain to her advantage. They fought side by side, anticipating each other's moves, a seamless dance of violence. When it was over, they stood among the bodies of the fallen raiders, breathing heavily in the humid air. The hallucinogenic storm had passed, leaving the jungle quiet and dripping. They returned to the cave, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a profound exhaustion. Kaelira sank to the floor, her body finally succumbing to the strain of the past few days. Her eyes fluttered closed, and within moments, she was asleep. It was the first time Jace had seen her truly rest, the first time she had allowed herself to be vulnerable in his presence. He watched her, the fierce princess, the living weapon, now just a woman sleeping in a cave on a forgotten world. The moonlight filtering through the vines traced the scars on her skin, the map that could change the galaxy. He felt a complex, dangerous mix of emotions, desire, fear, and a strange, unwelcome protectiveness. She was his enemy. She was his prisoner. She was his partner. He did not know what she was to him anymore, but he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he would let no one else have her. The first thing Jace noticed upon waking was the silence. The jungle's nocturnal chittering had faded with the dawn, replaced by a profound, expectant stillness. The second thing he noticed was the cold. The space beside him, where Kaelira had slept, was empty. He sat up instantly, every nerve on high alert. His rifle was where he had left it, but she was gone. The heavy scavenger's cloak lay folded neatly on the cave floor. Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through him. Had she been taken? Did more raiders arrive while he slept? Then he saw it, on the flat, gray surface of the rock where her head had rested. A message was scrawled. It was written in a dark, glistening fluid that was already starting to dry. Her blood. The letters were elegant, precise Virellan script, a language he had been forced to learn in the brutalist classrooms of military intelligence. "Follow only if you trust me." Jace stared at the words, his heart a cold, heavy drum in his chest. Trust her. The concept was absurd. She was a Virellan, a princess of the empire that had dismantled his life, but she was also the woman who had laughed with him in a hallucinogenic storm, who had shown him her deepest scar, who had pulled away from a kiss because she was afraid of hurting him. He ran a hand over his face, the rough stubble scratching his palm. This was not an abduction. This was a choice she had made, and a choice she was now forcing upon him. To stay on this godforsaken planet and wait for a slow death, or to follow the most dangerous woman he had ever met into the heart of the fire. There was no real choice at all. He spent the next 2 hours preparing. He salvaged what he could from the wrecked ship and the dead raiders. From their corrupted biotech, he took armor plates of hardened cartilage and a neural scrambler designed to fool low-level genetic scanners. He used his plasma cutter to reshape the plates, integrating them with his own tactical gear. He smeared a paste made from crushed phosphorescent fungi over the armor, mimicking the faint glow of Virellan's circulatory systems. He jury-rigged the scrambler to a power cell on his belt. It was a crude disguise, but it might pass a cursory inspection. He would be a hybrid mercenary, a half-breed, a common sight in the lawless outer territories. Plausible enough. Using the ship's damaged navigation logs, he found her destination, a hidden Virellan outpost designated Sanctuary K7, located in a cluster of uncharted asteroids a short jump away. The ship's short-range shuttle, the Leech, was miraculously intact. It was little more than an engine with a seat, but it would fly. The journey was tense and silent. As he approached the asteroid cluster, the outpost resolved on his screen. It was not built on an asteroid, but into one, a massive hollowed-out rock, its surface bristling with weapon emplacements and sensor arrays. The entrance was a colossal biomechanical iris that dilated to accept incoming ships. It was a fortress. He broadcast a standard mercenary identification code, one he had lifted from a bounty hunter's datapad years ago. The neural scrambler pulsed, masking his purely human DNA with a chaotic wash of static and alien markers. After a tense moment, the iris ground open, and a green docking light beckoned him in. The inside of the outpost was a sterile, intimidating display of Virilan power. The architecture was all soaring arches of bone-white material and walls that seemed to breathe with a slow, rhythmic light. Guards in sleek black armor, their faces hidden behind insectoid helmets, stood at perfect attention. Their presence was a constant, silent threat. The air hummed with contained energy and the faint, clean scent of sterilized air. This was the empire he remembered, cold, efficient, and utterly inhuman. His disguise held for less than 15 minutes. He was making his way through a crowded transit hub, trying to remain inconspicuous, when a scanner archway flashed a sudden, piercing crimson. Alarms blared. Every guard in the massive chamber turned toward him in perfect, synchronized unison. A human detected. A synthesized voice announced from all directions, "Contaminant breach." Jace drew his pulse pistol, but he was hopelessly outmatched. Dozens of pulse rifles were leveled at him. There was no escape. He was disarmed and subdued with brutal efficiency. His arms wrenched behind his back, his face slammed against the cold, smooth floor. He was dragged through stark, white corridors to a vast circular chamber that could only be a throne room. The ceiling was a dome of black, shimmering crystal, and in the center, on a raised dais, sat a throne of jagged, obsidian-like material. On the throne sat a Virellan woman who looked like a sharper, colder version of Kaelira. She had the same silver hair but wore it in a severe, tight braid. Her chrome eyes were narrow, filled with an ancient, predatory intelligence. This had to be the sister, but Jace barely noticed her. His attention was fixed on the figure standing beside the throne, her head bowed in submission. It was Kaelira. She was dressed in a simple gray tunic, the attire of a servant or a penitent. The fire he had seen in her was gone, replaced by a vacant, broken compliance. "Bring the creature forward," the sister commanded, her voice like the scraping of steel on stone. Jace was forced to his knees before the dais. He looked up at Kaelira, searching her face for any sign of recognition, any hint that this was part of a plan. He found nothing. Her eyes were empty, her expression unreadable. "So this is the human pet you picked up in your little flight of fancy." "Kaelira," the sister said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. She rose and circled him like a shark. "He is unremarkable, messy, asymmetrical. Why did you allow him to live?" "He was a tool. Sister Lyra," Kaelira said, her voice a monotone. She did not look at Jace. "A means of transport, nothing more." "A tool you brought to my doorstep," Lyra countered. "You have led my enemies to me." "I came here to surrender," Kaelira said softly. "To accept my fate," he followed. "His presence is not my design." A cold dread washed over Jace. This was not an act. He had been a fool. He had trusted her, and she had led him into a trap, serving him up to her sister to save her own skin. The flicker of connection he had felt, the shared laughter, the moment in the cave, it had all been a lie, a manipulation. "What should we do with him, little sister?" Lyra purred, enjoying the display of power. "Shall we have him flayed? Or perhaps we could test the new neural parasites on him." I hear they are quite expressive. Kalira finally lifted her head, and her eyes met Jace's. For a fraction of a second, he saw it. A flicker of the woman from the jungle, a spark of defiance, quickly extinguished. He is a soldier, Kalira said, her voice flat. His mind is full of coalition secrets. Torture would be a waste. A quick death is more efficient. It will prove my loyalty to you and to the new order. Betrayal was a blade, and it twisted in Jace's gut, sharper and more painful than any physical wound. He stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. Lyra laughed, clearly delighted. Excellent, practical. You are learning, little sister. She gestured to the guards. Take him to the echo chamber for processing. Kalira, you will witness it. A final lesson in severing sentimental attachments. The echo chamber was a dark, spherical room in the bowels of the outpost. The walls were made of a strange, porous black stone that seemed to drink the light and sound. The moment the heavy door sealed behind them, a profound, disorienting silence fell. Jace was shoved into the center of the room. Kalira entered behind him, the guards flanking her. Leave us, Kalira commanded the guards. Her voice was no longer submissive. It was the voice of a princess, imbued with an authority that was absolute. The guards hesitated, looking at each other. My sister wants me to learn a lesson, Kalira added, her voice dropping, becoming more persuasive. I cannot do that with you two staring at my back. I will deliver the human's heart to her myself. Now, go. The guards, conditioned to obey the royal bloodline, bowed stiffly and exited, sealing the door behind them. They were alone in the suffocating silence. You treacherous, Jace started, his voice a low, venomous snarl. Quiet, she snapped, her entire demeanor changing in an instant. The broken servant vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused strategist. She rushed to his side, her fingers working quickly at the complex locking mechanism on his binders. There is no time. Do you have any idea how hard it was to convince them you were not part of my plan? The binders fell away. Jace rubbed his wrists, staring at her in stunned confusion. Your plan? Your plan was to serve me up for execution. My plan is to get to the core synapse, which is hidden in the heart of this station, behind security protocols that even my sister cannot bypass. She explained in a rapid, hushed whisper. The final access point requires two distinct genetic markers to open, one of a Virilan high blood and one of a non-Virilan. It is a failsafe from the old war, to prevent any single person from seizing control. Lyra has been trying for months to splice a viable hybrid to get past it. She has not succeeded. She looked him directly in the eyes, and the intensity of her gaze stole his breath. I did not lead you into a trap, Jace. I brought you here because I need you. You are my key. The tension in the room shifted. The anger, the betrayal, it all dissolved, replaced by the familiar, dangerous current that flowed between them. They were standing close, their bodies almost touching in the absolute darkness. You could have told me, he said, his voice hoarse. And what would you have done? Charged in with your pistol blazing? She shot back. Lyra had to believe I was broken. She had to believe you were a loose end. It was the only way she would grant me access to any part of the station. The only way I could get you this close to the objective. Her plan was insane. It was reckless. It was also brilliant. So what now? He asked. We just walk out of here? No, she said, her voice softening. Now, I have to kill you. He saw the flicker of regret in her eyes before she moved. She rose up on her toes, her hands coming up to cup his face. The air crackled. The moment that had been interrupted in the cave on that jungle planet had returned, more potent, more desperate than before. She kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce, possessive, a branding. Her lips were soft, but there was a strange metallic taste to them, a faint tingling numbness. For a moment, he was lost in it, in the raw, undeniable connection between them. Then the poison hit. It started as a cold wave, spreading from his lips through his entire body. His limbs grew heavy, unresponsive. His breath hitched in his chest. His vision began to tunnel, the edges turning a fuzzy, dark gray. He tried to pull back, but his muscles would not obey. He saw Kalira's face through the encroaching darkness, her chrome eyes wide, shimmering with something that looked like tears. "It is a neurotoxin from the crate orchid," she whispered against his lips, her voice the last thing he heard clearly. "It mimics death, slows the heart to a single beat per minute, complete paralysis. It is my only way of getting you out of here. Just hold on, survive this, Jace, please, survive this." His knees buckled. She caught him, lowering his body gently to the floor. The world dissolved into blackness. He was falling, weightless, into a cold, silent void. His last conscious thought was of the irony. The kiss he had wanted was the one that was killing him. Jace drifted in a state of non-being. He was aware, but only distantly, a ghost trapped in a paralyzed shell. He felt himself being lifted, carried. He heard the door to the echo chamber open. He heard Lyra's voice, cool and satisfied. "Good. See that the trash is disposed of in the reclamation furnace." He was dumped onto a pile of other bodies. The smell of death was overwhelming. These were Lyra's failures, Jace realized. The failed hybrids, the political prisoners, the inconvenient loose ends. He lay among them, unable to move, unable to scream, as a conveyor belt began to grind slowly, carrying the pile of corpses toward a distant, ominous red glow. The furnace. He fought against the paralysis, his mind screaming at his unresponsive limbs, millimeter by painful millimeter. Feeling began to return, a pins and needles agony that was the most welcome sensation of his life. He managed to twitch a finger, then another. The conveyor belt groaned, moving him closer to the heat. He could feel the warmth on his face. He forced his eyes open. He was only meters from the edge. With a surge of pure, primal will, he rolled his body, a clumsy, agonizing motion, tumbling from the conveyor belt and onto the grated floor below, just as the bodies ahead of him slid over the edge and were consumed by the fire. He lay there, gasping, his body convulsing as the neurotoxin's grip slowly receded. He was alive. As he struggled to his feet, using the wall for support, he heard voices from a nearby maintenance tunnel. It was Lyra and her chief medical officer. Jace pressed himself into the shadows. "Listening? The procedure is ready," the medical officer was saying. "We can begin the extraction as soon as the synapse chamber is prepped." "And you are certain it will work?" Lyra asked. "The neural severance is a delicate process," the officer replied. "We will essentially be peeling the map's data layer from her cerebral cortex and spinal column. The integrity of the code should remain intact. The host, however, will not survive. The feedback loop will be catastrophic, but you will have your map, my lady." Lyra was silent for a moment. A pity. She was almost useful again. "Very well. Proceed. I want that code by the time the next cycle begins. I am tired of waiting to claim my empire." The voices faded as they moved down the corridor. Jace leaned against the wall, the cold metal biting into his skin. His breath came in ragged, furious gasps. He had survived her kiss, her fake death. He had been ready to follow her insane plan, to be her key. But the plan had changed. She had not known. Kalira, for all her scheming, had not known that her sister never intended for her to survive the process. She was walking into her own execution, believing it was a coup, the last vestiges of the old soldier, the man who hated all Virelans. Died in that moment, incinerated in the fires of the reclamation furnace. All that was left was a cold, burning rage. He was not her key. He was not her partner. He was her only hope. He checked his gear. They had taken his pistol, but his knife, his precious shard of memory and vengeance, was still sheathed at his belt. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. He was no longer infiltrating. He was no longer playing a part. This was now a suicide mission, and he was going to break Kalira out or die tearing this station apart. There was no plan. There was only the fire in his blood and the image of her, broken on a surgical table, burned into his mind. Jace moved through the bowels of the station not like a soldier, but like an apex predator loosed in a cage. The maintenance tunnels were a maze of steaming pipes and crackling power conduits, a territory he understood far better than the pristine, sterile corridors above. He moved with a brutal economy of motion, a ghost in the machine. A two-guard patrol rounded a corner. Before their helmeted sensors could even register him as a threat, he was on them. He used the darkness, the hiss of a pressure valve, the element of absolute surprise. The first guard went down with a choked gurgle. Jace's hand clamped over his respirator, the point of his knife finding the soft tissue at the base of the neck. The second turned, raising his rifle, but Jace was already inside his guard, a whirlwind of motion. He broke the guard's arm at the elbow, spun him around, and used his body as a shield as he drove the knife home. 2 silent, efficient deaths. He did not feel remorse. He did not feel anything but the cold, clear purpose that now consumed him. He climbed a service ladder, emerging through a floor grate into a deserted observation gallery overlooking the station's central power core. He could feel the thrum of immense energy through the soles of his boots. He knew from schematic memory that the core synapse would be adjacent to the primary power source, shielded and isolated. He found a heavily armored door, flanked by 2 guards who were far larger and more imposing than the others. Their armor was different, augmented with external servos and glowing power nodes, enhanced. Lyra's personal guard. He could not take them both head-on. He located a high-pressure coolant pipe running along the ceiling, a well-placed cut from his plasma torch, and the pipe exploded, spewing a thick cloud of cryogenic mist that instantly flash-froze everything in the corridor. The guards, caught completely by surprise, were momentarily blinded, their armor frosting over, their sensors screaming with proximity and temperature warnings. It was the only opening he would get. He burst from the mist, a demon of vengeance. He slammed into the first guard, his knife seeking the vulnerable joint between the helmet and the chest plate. The crystalline blade sank deep, but the second guard was already recovering, turning its massive frame toward him. It swiped a gauntleted hand, a blow that would have pulped a normal man. Jace ducked under it, but the backswing caught him high on the ribs, cracking bone and sending a spray of fire through his nervous system. He gasped. The air punched from his lungs. The guard raised a fist to finish him. Jace, fueled by pure, desperate fury, lunged forward, jamming his knife up under the guard's armored jaw. The enhanced soldier was impossibly strong. It grabbed his wrist, the servos in its gauntlet whining as it tried to crush his bones. There was a terrible, high-pitched screech of stressed crystal, and the blade of his knife, the shard of his past, the symbol of his survival, shattered against the guard's reinforced spine. The guard slumped, dead. But Jace was left holding a useless hilt, a jagged fragment of glass protruding from the metal. He clutched his side, his breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. He had no weapon. He was injured. But the door to the synapse was now unguarded. He forced the heavy door open and stumbled inside. The scene before him was a nightmare of cold, clinical horror. The chamber was circular, sterile, and bathed in the harsh blue-white light of surgical lamps. In the center, Kailira was stretched out on a metallic table, held in place by shimmering energy restraints at her wrists and ankles. She was conscious. Her chrome eyes were wide with a silent, pleading terror. Lyra stood nearby, watching with a look of detached curiosity, while a medical officer made adjustments to a complex array of laser emitters poised over Kailira's body. Precise, bloodless incisions had been made along her side and back. The flaps of her skin, her beautiful, glowing skin, were held open by small, localized stasis fields, exposing the intricate, luminous web of the neural map that was woven into her very being. The delicate, golden fibers of the map pulsed faintly, like a captured constellation. "The neural interface is established, my lady," the medical officer said, not looking up from his work. "We can begin the severance protocol." "Proceed," Lyra commanded. That was the moment Jace chose to announce his presence. He did not shout. He did not issue a challenge. He simply threw the heavy, broken hilt of his knife with all his remaining strength. It spun through the air, a useless piece of junk, and struck the medical officer square in the temple. The man dropped like a stone, the laser array sparking and shutting down. Lyra spun around, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. "You impossible!" Jace charged, ignoring the fire in his ribs. He was not aiming for Lyra. He was aiming for the main control pedestal for the surgical equipment. He slammed his body into it, and the entire apparatus screeched as it was torn from its moorings. The stasis fields flickered and died. The energy restraints holding Kailira vanished. 2 more enhanced guards, stationed in alcoves near the wall, moved to intercept him. He was weaponless, injured. He fought with the savagery of a cornered animal. He dodged a plasma blast that sizzled the air where his head had been. He grabbed a discarded surgical tool, a heavy metal instrument, and swung it, shattering a guard's helmet visor. He fought, he bled, he refused to fall. But he was fading. A plasma bolt grazed his shoulder, searing the flesh. He stumbled, falling to one knee. One of the guards stood over him, rifle raised for the final shot. He heard a cry, a sound of pure, unadulterated rage. Kailira, free from her restraints, had launched herself from the table. She landed on the guard's back, her fingers hooking into the gaps in his armor, her body a blur of motion. She was a princess no more. She was a feral creature fighting for her life, for his life. There was a wet, tearing sound, and the guard collapsed, a vital power conduit ripped from his neck. The second guard turned to face her, but Jace was back on his feet. He tackled the remaining guard, driving him backward into a power terminal. There was a massive explosion of sparks, and the guard went rigid, his armor smoking before crashing to the floor. The chamber was suddenly quiet, save for the blare of station-wide alarms and their own harsh, ragged breathing. Lyra was gone, having vanished through a hidden exit during the chaos. Jace staggered toward the table where Kailira had been restrained. His vision was blurring at the edges. He saw the broken hilt of his knife lying on the floor. He picked it up, the jagged shard of crystal a pathetic remnant of the weapon that had defined him for so long. Kailira had slumped against the table, clutching her side where the incisions had been made. Bioluminescent fluid, her golden blood, leaked between her fingers. She was half-conscious, her body trembling with shock and overload. She looked at him, then at the broken blade in his hand. Her own hand, shaking, reached out toward it. He stood over her, his body a symphony of pain. He was torn. The rage that had driven him here was gone, replaced by an aching, desperate need to protect her. But the symbol of his vengeance was still in his hand. He could end it all. He could grant her a merciful death, freeing her from her sister, from her purpose as a living weapon. It would be a final, terrible justice for his fallen friends. Her lips trembled. A single desperate whisper cut through the noise of the alarms. End me or enter me. His choice was made in a heartbeat. The past, the hatred, the vengeance, it was all meaningless ash. He let the broken hilt fall from his fingers. It clattered to the floor, the sound of a decade of grief being laid to rest. He knelt before her, his hands coming up to cradle her face. With a sound that was half a sob, half a roar of defiance, he kissed her. The world exploded. It was not a kiss of passion, but of detonation. The moment their lips met, the circuit was completed. Her mind crashed into his, not as a poison, but as a flood. He felt her entire life, the cold loneliness of a royal court, the terror of her father's experiments, the desperate flight through the stars, the sharp, biting fear of her sister's betrayal. And she felt his, the camaraderie of his unit, the searing fire of their deaths, the gnawing emptiness of his survival, the confusing, powerful emotions she had awakened in him. Their minds, their memories, their very souls merged into a single incandescent point of consciousness. The map inside her was no longer just a code, it was a part of them both. And together, in that shared mental space, they reached out. The core synapse, a colossal crystalline sphere suspended in the chamber below them, responded. It flared with a light so bright it was blinding, a pure white light that was not energy, but information. A single command, born from their shared pain and reluctant hope, pulsed outward. A command not of control but of release. Sleep. Across a dozen star systems, the command arrived in the same instant. On the bridge of Lyra's flagship, the Vengeance, the consoles went dark, the engines falling silent. A squadron of Virellan hunters, closing in on a freighter, drifted lifelessly as their power died. The glowing patterns on the armor of Virellan soldiers on a dozen occupied worlds faded to nothing. Centuries of weapon programming, of instinctual aggression, of imperial control were simply turned off. The feedback was catastrophic. A wave of psychic energy washed back through their connection, and Kalira screamed, her body convulsing. The overload was too much for her. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she collapsed, a dead weight in his arms. The light from her skin, from the exposed neural map, flickered and died. The chamber around them began to self-destruct. The synapse, its purpose fulfilled, was now unstable. The walls cracked, the ceiling groaned, consoles exploded in showers of sparks. Jace, acting on pure instinct, lifted Kalira into his arms. She was terrifyingly light. He ran, his injured body screaming in protest, carrying her out of the dying chamber and into the chaos of the corridors. The station was tearing itself apart, both physically and politically. The deactivation of all Virellan tech had been a universal command. It had disarmed Lyra's loyalists, but not the rebels who had been using scavenged, non-networked tech. A civil war had erupted in the wake of the power vacuum. Pockets of brutal fighting raged in the corridors. Jace dodged blaster fire, leaping over the bodies of loyalists and rebels alike, his only thought to get her to safety. He saw their only way out. A long, enclosed sky bridge of translucent bioglass that connected the main station to the distant docking bay where the Leech was birthed. It was their last hope. As he sprinted onto the bridge, a stray missile from the fighting below struck one of its support pylons. The entire structure groaned, and cracks like lightning spiderwebbed across the glass floor beneath his feet. He ran faster. Kalira held tight against his chest as the bridge began to disintegrate behind him. Large sections of the floor shattered, falling away into the void of the asteroid's hollow core. He could see the docking bay doors, 100 meters away. The bridge bucked violently, throwing him off balance. He looked back and saw a chasm of empty space chasing him, consuming the bridge piece by piece. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, he pushed off, leaping the last 10 meters just as the final section of the sky bridge gave way and plunged into the darkness. He landed hard on the solid deck of the docking bay, the impact jarring his already broken body. He rolled, shielding Kalira with his own form. He lay there, gasping for breath, amidst the sounds of a dying station and a nascent rebellion, with the unconscious architect of it all limp in his arms. They were alive, they were free, and they had just broken the galaxy. The shuttle, the leech, was a coffin built for two. It screamed through the void, a tiny, insignificant spark fleeing the death of a star-sized hornet's nest. Jace held the controls with a white-knuckled grip, his body a map of fresh agony. His ribs were a cage of fire, his shoulder a searing brand. Beside him, Kalira was a fallen star. The vibrant, living light of the neural map had been extinguished. Her skin was now the pale, still color of moonlight on snow. The only sign of her ordeal was the raw, angry red of the surgical incisions on her side and the faint golden residue of her blood. She stirred as he leveled them out in the relative safety of deep space. The chaos of Sanctuary K7 shrinking behind them into just another angry red dot in the black. Her chrome eyes fluttered open, no longer swirling with the data of a galactic network, but reflecting only the dim light of the cockpit. They were just eyes now. She looked lost. "Did we?" she began, her voice a dry, fragile whisper. "We did," Jace confirmed, his voice rough. "The synapse is gone, and so is the station." She slowly sat up, wincing as the movement pulled at her wounds. She looked at her own hands, turning them over as if they belonged to a stranger. "I do not feel it anymore. The map, it was a constant hum, a presence. Now it is just quiet." She looked at him, her gaze clear and terrifyingly direct. "What did it feel like, Jace? Being inside my mind?" He thought for a long moment, navigating the memory. It was not a violation. It was a merging, a terrifying and beautiful dissolution of the self. "It felt like I finally understood," he said, the admission costing him more than he wanted to admit. They flew in silence for a time, two enemies who had shared a soul. The galaxy was in turmoil. News feeds on the open channels were a chaotic scramble of reports. Entire Virellan fleets had gone dark. Imperial outposts were suddenly, inexplicably silent. Factions on both sides were claiming responsibility, and the power vacuum was already being filled with bloodshed and confusion. They were the two most wanted individuals in the universe, the epicenter of a political earthquake, and they were utterly alone in a stolen shuttle with half a tank of fuel. "There is one place," Kalira said, her voice gaining a sliver of its former strength. "A neutral world, Praxis. It is a legend, mostly. A place where disputes are settled not by armies but by testimony. They say truth is the only law there, and it is judged in an arena of memory." "I have heard the stories," Jace grunted. "The Crucible, a place where they put your soul on trial. Most people do not walk away from it." "We are out of options," she stated simply. "We cannot run forever. The truth of what happened at the synapse must be told. Otherwise, this truce you have created will just be the quiet before a much bigger storm." He looked at her, at the raw determination hardening in her eyes. She was right. The act they had committed was too large to remain a secret. It would be twisted into a weapon by one side or the other. Their only chance was to define it themselves. Praxis was a world of stark, brutalist beauty. Its cities were not built, but carved from mountains of black, volcanic rock, connected by soaring crystalline bridges. There was no color, only the sharp contrast of light and shadow. It was a world that made no compromises. They landed their shuttle in the public port of the Fulcrum, the planet's capital, and were met not by guards, but by silent, robed figures known only as listeners. There were no questions, no demands. They simply waited. Kailira, cloaked and hooded, stepped forward. "I am Princess Kailira of the Virellan Empire. I petition the crucible of testimony. I will offer my memory as evidence for a lasting peace between my people and the Terran coalition." One of the listeners, a being whose face was a smooth, featureless mask of white porcelain, inclined its head. The petition was accepted. The crucible was a vast, open-air amphitheater carved into the heart of a mountain. Thousands of beings from 100 different neutral worlds sat in silent judgment on tiers of polished black stone. In the center of the arena floor was a single raised platform on which rested a complex device of interlocking silver rings and glowing crystals. The mnemonic loom. The air was cold, thin, and heavy with anticipation. This was not a court of law. It was a place of psychic execution. Kailira walked to the platform alone. She shed her cloak, revealing the simple tunic beneath, the fresh scars on her body a testament to her journey. She looked small and terribly vulnerable under the immense gray sky. She lay down on the platform, and a listener fitted a crystalline circlet to her head, connecting her to the loom. "The testimony begins," a disembodied voice echoed through the amphitheater. The air above the loom shimmered, and then they were all there, inside her memory. They felt the cold dread of a young princess being told she was to be a living sacrifice. They experienced the sharp, sterile pain as her father's surgeons cut her open, weaving the golden threads of the map into her nerves. They felt her sister's chilling ambition, the casual cruelty that was far more terrifying than any open warfare. They felt her terror as she fled, the desperation of her hiding, the shock of Jace's appearance on her ship. The entire arena was silent, captive, living her fear and her resolve alongside her. When it was over, the projection faded. Kailira lay on the platform, trembling, tears streaming silently from her eyes. She had laid her soul bare for the galaxy to see. A murmur went through the crowd. It was a powerful, moving testimony, but it was only one side of the story. One of the porcelain-masked listeners rose. Its voice, calm and implacable, filled the space. "We have seen the pain of the key. Now we must see the pain of the lock. The human, Jace Theron, will come forward and offer his testimony." Jace froze. This was not part of the plan. He was a witness, not a petitioner. "I refuse," he said, his voice a low growl. "Testimony in the crucible is not a choice." The listener stated, "Truth requires balance. The Virellan Empire is on trial here, not just this woman. You are its victim. You will provide your memory." Guards, silent and inexorable, moved toward him. There was no fighting them. Kailira looked at him from the platform, her eyes pleading, trapped. He walked the longest walk of his life down to the arena floor. He lay on a second platform brought out beside hers. The crystalline circlet was cold against his skin. He closed his eyes, and the darkness behind them was immediately filled with fire and screams. The crucible was plunged into his personal hell. They were on Cygnus X-1 in the cockpit of his burning destroyer. They felt his disbelief turn to horror as his fleet was torn apart by living ships. Then they were in the prison camp. The arena gasped as they experienced the bioagent. They felt the phantom spiders crawling under their skin, They saw the faces of their loved ones melt into screaming monstrosities. They felt Jace's mind being peeled back, layer by layer, the relentless clinical torture designed by the very woman whose pain they had just witnessed. They felt the death of Sergeant Rostova, the weight of his failure, the crushing, soul-deep agony of survival. It was a memory of pure, undiluted suffering, a testament to the brutal cost of the Virilan war machine. By the time the memory faded, a current of raw hatred for the Virilan people was palpable in the air. He had given them the balance they wanted, and it was a verdict of guilt, signed in blood. But Jace was not finished. He focused his will, wresting control of the mnemonic loom. "You have seen what was done to me." His voice boomed through the arena, amplified by the device. "You have seen the monster they are." A new image formed, softer this time. It was the cave on the jungle planet. They saw Kaelira, her face illuminated by the hallucinogenic rain, her eyes full of a fear that mirrored his own. They saw her confess the secret of her scars. They felt the raw electric tension of the moment before the kiss, and they felt her pull away, felt her whisper, "You wouldn't survive me." Then the projection shifted again. They were in the echo chamber. They felt his shock at her betrayal, and then the stunning reversal. They felt the searing, venomous fire of her kiss, and they heard her desperate, whispered plea for him to survive. They felt his paralysis, his journey to the furnace, and they heard Lyra's voice sentencing Kaelira to death. The final memory he projected was of him standing over her in the synapse chamber, the broken hilt of his knife in his hand. The entire arena felt his conflict, the pull of a decade of vengeance warring with the fierce, undeniable need to save this one woman. The projection died. Jace sat up, his body drenched in sweat, his heart pounding. He looked out at the silent thousands, then at the impassive porcelain faces of the listeners. "Her people did this to me," he said, his voice cracking with emotion yet ringing with absolute conviction. "They took everything from me but this woman. She is not her people. She is the one who paid the price for their peace. She has the right to live. She has the right to be free of the war that made us both." Silence. A profound, echoing silence that stretched for an entire minute. Then, the lead listener stood. "The testimony is complete. The balance has been weighed. A verdict is reached." The being's voice was different now, not cold, but resonant with a deep, ancient gravity. "There can be no lasting peace built on a foundation of so much pain. But there can be a beginning. The Crucible declares a binding truce. All hostilities between the Terran Coalition and the consolidated Virilan houses will cease. An independent council, overseen by Praxis, will investigate the crimes of the former regime and the actions of the usurper. Lyra, the testimony of Kaelira and Jace Theron will be the first brick in the foundation of a new law. It was not a total victory, but it was more than either of them had dared to hope for. It was a chance. That evening, they stood on a high balcony overlooking the silent, carved city of the Fulcrum. The air was thin and cold. The shared ordeal of the Crucible had forged a new, unspoken bond between them. The secrets were all out. There was nothing left to hide behind. "So what now?" Jace asked, looking out at the alien sky. "Where do we go from here?" He felt her shift beside him. He turned to look at her. Kaelira was staring at her hands, a deep, sorrowful expression on her face. "There is no we, Jace," she said softly. "The truce is fragile. My people are in chaos. The old houses are shattered. The rebels are fighting among themselves. They need a leader, someone to guide them away from what my sister, what my father turned them into." A cold feeling washed over him. "You are not serious," After everything you did to get free, you are going back. I am not going back to the prison I fled, she said, finally looking up at him, her chrome eyes intense. I am going to build something new from the ruins. I owe them that. I owe it to the people who died under my family's name. I cannot rewrite their history, but I can help them write a better future. Her voice broke slightly. I cannot go with you. He wanted to argue. He wanted to tell her it was a suicide mission, that she owed them nothing. But he saw the look in her eyes. It was the same resolve she had when she petitioned the crucible. Her decision was made. This was her purpose, the one she had to see through. He nodded slowly, the hope that had been kindling in his chest turning to ash. I understand. He prepared to leave the next morning. The stray dog had been recovered by a neutral patrol and brought to Praxis. It sat on a launch pad, scarred and ugly, but his home. He walked up the ramp, the metallic clang of his boots echoing in the empty hangar. He did not look back. Looking back would be too hard. He was in the cockpit, running through the pre-flight sequence, his movements stiff and automatic. The engine whined to life. He was about to seal the ramp and request clearance when a figure appeared at the entrance. It was Kalira. She was not wearing the formal robes of a diplomat or the simple tunic of a petitioner. She was dressed in practical dark flight gear, similar to his own. In her hand, she held the sleek black helmet of a Virilan royal guard. As she walked up the ramp, she looked at the helmet, then casually tossed it aside. It clattered to the deck, a symbol of her old life, discarded. He stood up, his heart stopping in his chest. Kalira, what are you doing? She stopped at the edge of the cockpit, a small, wry smile on her lips. The smile he had first seen in a dying ship, the one that had infuriated and captivated him. My people will find their way. A council has already formed, she said. They do not need a princess to rule them. They need an example of what it means to be free. She took a final step, closing the distance between them. The war is over, Jace. My purpose as a weapon is over. My duty as an heir is over. She looked up at him, her eyes shining with a light that had nothing to do with nanobiotics and everything to do with a choice. Freely made. I have rewritten my purpose. Let's fly. He did not need to answer. He simply reached out his hand, and she took it. Together, they turned to the controls. A moment later, the stray dog lifted off, rising above the stark, black mountains of Praxis. It climbed into the sky, leaving behind politics and war, duty and destiny. They were no longer a commander and a princess, no longer a weapon and a victim, no longer enemies. They were just two survivors, heading for the stars, finally writing a map of their own.